Hey everybody, we are almost done with the semester. By now you should be close to submitting your final product for your author project if you haven't already. And I just want to remind you to take a look at what your classmates have done too. So far what I've seen is really good. Um, you should also be reading the wonderful poems for this week, and if you want to post about them, you can. I'm enjoying the posts so far. So now that all that's done, or once all of that is done, all that you will have left to do to complete English 212 is your final take-home exam. In this video, I want to talk about the context for that exam. I want to kind of give an overview of all that we've done and read this semester. And then I'll talk about the exam itself and what's required for that. So let's think about how much we covered. Remember, this is a survey course. As I said at the beginning of the semester, that means we cover a lot of stuff in a relatively short period. And we started about 150 years ago with the post-Civil War movement, realism. Remember, those authors were capturing ordinary people doing ordinary things in ordinary places, right? And these authors wanted their stories to communicate a lesson. So generally, when you got done with a realist story, which was in chronological order, pretty easy to follow, you had a sense of closure and a sense of some sort of lesson being communicated. Regionalism was all of that stuff with a special emphasis on a specific location, and psychological realism, of course, emphasized the character's internal cognitive processes, right? And then we ended that period in the late 1800s with naturalism, which is realism plus Darwin, an exploration of sort of the darker side of how we're sort of at the mercy of all these outside forces like heredity, the environment, and even just chance in shaping the outcomes of our lives. And then we moved into the 20th century with modernism. You remember that modernists really pushed the envelope in terms of subject matter. They started writing about things that were previously considered taboo. And they started experimenting with the way that they told stories and the way that they wrote their poems. So you see a lot of poetry written in free verse. You see a lot of alinear storytelling with gaps and omissions and flashbacks and multiple narrators. And then we also looked at the Harlem Renaissance. Some of those writers participated in some of this experimentation, and others used more traditional forms. But remember that these Black writers wanted to communicate what it was like to be Black in America during this time. They wanted to celebrate the beauty and dignity of being Black, in addition to protesting the conditions of racism. And then we moved into the contemporary period. And as you've heard me say, contemporary literature is sort of like modernism on steroids. All that stuff we've mentioned about experimentation, taboo subjects, all of that we see in contemporary literature, but probably magnified. We also see in the 20th and 21st centuries a real opening up of the canon. Do you remember when we talked about how traditionally the American literary canon, the British literary canon is populated mainly by the dead white men? We see now how American literary traditions are much more diverse than that and inclusive than that. So let's think about everything we've read in the context of those three major periods. We read short stories by 10 authors, poems by 28 poets, if you count this week's poems, which we should, two complete novels, one novella, and excerpts of two other novels. That's a lot of literature. If I added correctly, we read literature by 42 authors. And remember, in some cases, we read multiple poems by the same author or multiple short stories by the same author. So we've covered a lot of ground. And now that we've covered all that ground, I want you to be thinking about what you most valued from that reading list. Let's actually take a look. I wanted to show you, I've created a module for final exam week under all the other weekly content. And what I did is I updated our course reading list. So we originally had a bunch of authors listed in the course schedule, but I made a couple changes along the way. So this is our updated course reading list. And note that I've organized it by these three major movements. And I've listed all the authors and texts that we read. Look at all this. This is impressive. I'm really proud of you for reading all of this. Do you remember how some titles are italicized and some are in quotation marks? That'll be an important thing to remember as well. Smaller detail when you take your exam. So when you look at all of this, what stands out to you? What are you going to remember? what has been most fun to read, or what has been most valuable, even if it was difficult to read? What is going to stay with you? I want you to think about what you would recommend to other readers, because that's going to be your final exam. You are going to be creating a reading list, a book club for other readers, okay? And I want you, as you think about this, to be thoughtful about your own reading choices, your own the things that draw you to a text or to an author. Okay, so you'll be creating a book club, a small one with just 4 to 6 authors represented, depending upon whether you're going for an A, a B, or a C grade. If you want an A or a B, you're going to pick a specific theme for your book club or goal. Think about what you would want readers to get out of the experience of reading these texts. Maybe you want to pick texts that all center around a similar theme. So, for example, we read a bunch of stuff about nature and the role of nature. Maybe you want to design a book club about nature and American literature. You can be creative here when you think about these things. Let's take a look at the assignment. I'm going back into the module for final exam week. And right here is the final exam. Please read this whole thing over. This video is not a substitute for reading the final exam. But again, I want you to imagine that you have been asked to create a book club, maybe at your local library or at the Prairie State Library. You're going to create a reading list, and then you're going to write an essay, or even better, I think, a letter directly to the members of this book club to explain your goal or theme for the book club and the choices that you made, the things that they'll be reading. You're going to introduce them to this book club, in other words. Okay? So again, if you want an A or B, you'll choose a theme or a goal. You'll want to think about what you want your readers to get out of this experience. And then depending upon the grade you want, you'll choose 4 to 6 authors and their texts from our reading list. Here's an important requirement. You need to represent the whole class. So you need to have at least one realist, at least one modernist, and at least one contemporary author from this week or last week, meaning one of the fiction selections from week 15 or one of the contemporary poets from week 16, okay? You can do more than that, but that's the bare minimum. You need to make sure each of these periods is represented in your book club. You're going to list these authors at the top of your document, and then you're going to write your readers, your book club members, a letter explaining your choices. Okay, I would provide a brief introduction to them so that you explain your goal or your theme, if you have one, and that could be a great thing to return to in a conclusion to your letter or essay too. And then for each author you've chosen, provide a very brief recap of the text that you chose, and then, as usual, your ideas. Why do you want your students to read the text? Why'd you pick it? How does it fit with your larger goal for the class or the theme that you chose? Why will your students benefit from reading it? What are they going to get out of reading the text? Okay, so this is what I want your letter to cover, or a more traditional essay if that's what you'd like to do. Okay, let's take a look at the grading rubric. Okay, so you'll notice there are different requirements for A, B, and C, and D, depending upon how many texts you want to cover by how many different authors, and how what you want to do with a theme or goal, and then also how long and developed your letter or essay is. Okay, so let's start with this A category. If you want to earn an A on the exam, you're going to have at least 5 different authors, 5 or 6 different texts. So maybe you have 2 poems by Robert Frost, but at least 5 different authors meeting those requirements about every period being represented. Okay. You're going to show strong comprehension of the material. You're going to have an original theme or goal. You're going to have clear, original thinking about the text. You're going to show that not just that you read them, but that you've thought carefully about them and that you have your own ideas to bring to the discussion. It's going to be at least 750 words with good textual support and all the good English 101 stuff, good paragraphing and so on and so forth. A B is kind of like that, but maybe just not quite as stellar in terms of the degree of thinking, maybe just 4 texts instead of 5. All right. For a C, if you just want to get the basics of the job done, you're going to have at least 3 different authors, 4 texts though, so one of those authors might have 2 texts. You're going to show general comprehension. You might not have a theme or a goal. Some ideas might not be as developed as I'd like them to be, but you'll have at least 600 words and so on, okay? If you earn a D on the exam, it's because you didn't have enough assigned texts, you didn't show that you understood what you were talking about, and so on. So that's the basic requirements. Those are the basic requirements for the exam. I do want to say, some of you are going into this exam with very strong grades. You might do the math and realize all I need to do to get my B or A in the class is write a C exam, and that might be your decision. Okay? Or you might have tons of priorities over the next week, and you might decide just to do the C exam. There's no value judgment for me on that. That's your decision to make about what kind of exam that you'd like to write, okay? The usual stuff applies. If you plagiarize, if you use any outside sources, that will be an F on the exam. Submit a Word document. You have a week to do this. If you need an extra day, let me know. Ask ahead of time for an extension. Otherwise, the late penalty will apply. I do need these by Saturday the 15th so I can do my final grading and meet my deadline. All right. If something terrible happens and you really need extra time, please let me know. Please be in touch with me. You don't need a works cited list, but if you're using an electronic text, you should probably just write me a note to let me know that so I understand why you're not citing page numbers for the short stories and novels. I think that's all I want to say about that. At the end here, I've just got some reminders about conventions for these little things that you should remember. You've seen these before. I've provided these in the last 2 exams as well. I would encourage you to start the exam early and don't try to write it in one sitting. Return to it so you can revise and improve and proofread and so on. Okay? Have fun, be creative. If you have any questions, definitely reach out to me. I'm here for you. Doug and I both know that you can do this exam. Thank you for all that you've read this semester and all that you've done. I've learned from your insights. In the next couple of days, I'll be posting my list of recommendations for you as well. Okay? Yeah, email me if you have any questions and do your best work.